If you think Barcelona's real estate market is terrible today, wait until you hear how it was in the 1920s and 30s. This video was supposed to be part of an exciting episode I will release very soon about the 1931 Barcelona rent strike, so subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss it. You might already find the link to that episode in the description. I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and today I will explain Barcelona's growth until 1930 and the state of the housing market. Barcelona opened new possibilities when it destroyed its medieval walls in 1854. The city's political and economic elites wanted to create a modern, capitalist city that, in their idealism, would bring progress. Ildefons Cerdà designed the urban reform that would be the Eixample, envisioning a Barcelona where people of different social classes would live together in harmony. However, his urban plan was heavily distorted when it was applied, due to the opposition of landowners and landlords and real estate speculation, a feature of capitalism. The Eixample wasn't completed until the 1930s, lacking almost all of the green and open spaces Cerdà had planned. And the Eixample had many more buildings crammed into the same space, resulting in a much lower quality of life. Barcelona's population grew rapidly. It quadrupled from 1850 to 1900, and the city absorbed previous independent towns like Gràcia and Sants. From 1900 to 1930, the population doubled again, reaching 1.1 million people, making it the most populated city in Spain. Due to low birth rates among locals and the capitalists' need for cheap labor, especially for the massive construction projects for the 1929 International Exposition, many landless workers from Valencia, Aragon, Murcia, and Andalusia moved to Barcelona. Because of that, by 1930, 35% of Barcelona's residents were not Catalan. Land and property owners were excited to profit from Barcelona's rapid growth. Landlords were organized in the official chamber of Urban Property of Barcelona, or COPAP for short. By the way, for many years this chamber was led by Joan Pich i Pont, the leader of the right-wing Radical Republican Party in Barcelona. This shows that political and economic elites were and are often the same. COPAP had nearly 97,000 members in 1931 for a province of 1.76 million people. In 1928, the wealthiest 3.5% of landlords controlled between 50 and 60% of Barcelona's real estate market. In contrast, about 97% of Barcelona's workers were tenants, as only a few skilled workers could save enough money to buy a home. Barcelona's construction companies were small and lacked capital, barely meeting two-thirds of the demand for new housing. Small property owners also didn't have enough money to reinvest. This combination of factors led to a dramatic increase in worker exploitation through rents. Rental prices rose between 50 and 150% throughout the 1920s, going from an average of 20 pesetas per month in 1920 to an average of 50 to 55 pesetas per month in 1931. This happened despite a 1920 law that limited rent increases to a maximum of 10% every 5 years. Rent costs consume up to 40% of Barcelona workers' wages, while the average in other European cities at the time was 15%. But the housing problem in 1920s and 1930s Barcelona wasn't just about rent hikes. Apartments originally built for one family were subdivided to house up to 8 families. By 1927, about 100,000 people in Barcelona were subtenants. The situation was especially bad in the Raval neighborhood, which had a population density 10 times higher than the city average. The Raval was then popularly known as the Barrio Chino, meaning Chinese neighborhood. Not because it hosted a Chinese community, but because it was infamous for its marginality and lawlessness, much like Chinatowns at that time. But the greatest safety issue for workers weren't the armed robberies or expropriations that so concerned the Republican bourgeois press, but instead the danger of falling ill. Many workers lived in terrible sanitary conditions in their homes, which help spread diseases like tuberculosis or the bubonic plague, even among children. In 1933, a health report showed that 20,000 apartments housing 100,000 people lack water because the greedy landlords refused to provide it, despite a law that had made it mandatory since 1891. This lack of water supply was a major reason typhoid fever remained endemic in Barcelona while it had been eradicated in other cities. Doctors at the time pointed out the obvious. Poor hygiene in homes was strongly linked to worker deaths. Avoidable diseases and workplace accidents, which could be prevented with proper safety measures, were and still are the hidden tax that the poor pay for being poor, sometimes with their lives. It's very telling that neoliberals don't call for the elimination of this tax. Besides diseases, unemployment was another major threat for proletarians, as it could quickly lead to eviction and homelessness. Evictions happened daily, and hundreds of people in Barcelona were homeless, mostly single and unskilled men, but also families with children. Those who couldn't afford rent ended up on the streets, in cheap hostels, or even in places where they paid to sleep standing up. In the 1930s, about 30,000 people lived on the streets, in shacks, or temporary shelters, even though there were around 40,000 vacant apartments in Barcelona before the July 1936 coup, according to Chris Ilham. So there wasn't a shortage of housing, but a shortage of available housing on the market. This led to the development of Shantytowns. Shanties were substandard housing, usually less than 20 square meters, made of wood, cardboard, and scrap materials, without toilets, water, or electricity. The shanties were generally not built by their inhabitants, but by those who owned the private land, meaning landowners charged rent to the poor, who were usually newly arrived immigrants. Many speculators, even those with little capital, profited from this housing crisis, with shanty rents sometimes higher than those of regular workers' apartments, due to the shortage of housing. Meanwhile, the government did nothing to enforce laws protecting tenants. The only real public housing initiative was during Primo de Rivera's dictatorship in the 1920s, with 2,229 homes. The construction of public housing was clearly insufficient, as it is now in Spain. The so-called casas baratas, or cheap houses, were intended to move shantytown dwellers from the Montjuic mountain to the outskirts of Barcelona, as they spoiled the beautiful views of the palaces built for the 1929 International Exposition. The cheap houses were only cheap in materials. They were little more than shanties charged at prices similar to those in the private market in the same area. Moreover, they were built in rows to make it easier for the police to monitor and suppress any disturbances. As expected in a capitalist society, Barcelona's urban planning reflected socioeconomic inequalities, with distinct neighborhoods for the wealthy and the poor, and also for Catalans and newly arrived immigrants from other parts of Spain. This context helps explain the 1931 rent strike. I will leave a link to the episode discussing it in the description and the pinned comment on YouTube. This is a summary of the housing crisis and poverty in 1920s and 1930s Barcelona. If you want to know more, I recommend reading Chris Ilham's book Class, Culture and Conflict in Barcelona and Angela Smith's Read Barcelona. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes, and you can also support my work at patreon.com/newhistoryspain or with a one-time donation. Thank you for tuning in and see you soon!